Thank you for creating that heart space in this room. I think it's going to be the perfect field for what we have coming tonight. I'm going to let Jerry introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Judy. Can you hear me now? That was wonderful grounding from Judy. She does a marvelous job of that, so thank you. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Jeanne Love and Regina Ochoa. They're like old friends because we've been working with them for a long time now. For the organization, we've been working with them for more than 30 years, actually. The transcripts were there from 1986 or thereabouts. I got some messages, and Richard Scobie said that get the stuff out there, because they had a message to deliver. And we're very happy that we put a website together with regard to what the wonderful things that Jeanne and Regina did in terms of putting it all together back 30 years ago. They had some transcripts, and Jana Mosak back there, and Mark Smith, and were the editors. I sort of put the groundwork together for it, but then Ken Morley put the website together. And so we've been working on this for a long time. And now to culminate in getting Jeanne and Regina here is marvelous. They're wonderful ladies, and the story that they'll be telling you is absolutely extraordinary, because the astronauts came into Jeanne right at the time of the explosion of the Challenger, and Krista McAuliffe was there, and you'll hear more about this. And if you've been reading the transcripts on the challengercc.org, you'll hear all about, you'll see the actual words that were spoken. And the story went on for about 2 years, but in actuality, the story is ongoing. It is going on now, basically. So, and you'll hear all about this from Regina and Jeanne. And you might wonder, why Jeanne and Regina? Why did they suddenly come in through them? Richard Scobie has something to say about that, but Seth had something to say about that also. Because Seth said that really Krista, who was the school teacher, astronaut who died, Jeanne and Regina are linked at the soul level, or soul linkage level. And the analogy I was given was that if you have an oak branch and the leaves, there are like 3 leaves next to each other. And that's how they are. It's fascinating. But let me read you what Richard Scobie said. And this just came in about 2 weeks ago. It came in through some automatic writing that occurred. And these people do a marvelous job of reading the messages that are there. Richard says, there have been a few questions that have been brought up lately. A revisited question from those on your side of life. Why you, meaning why did the crew pick you, Jeanne Love and Regina Ochoa, to make their voice heard? Simple answer. We did not choose these two. In fact, they were not even on the proverbial radar of choice to contact. Others were out there listening for our psychic signature, They were being monitored by the government. Some were individuals who had been trained by the government for just this type of communication. Others were involved or contacted by members of the NASA program and the extensions to find psychics or communicators to listen in on what may have been discovered. All that to let you know, we, the Challenger crew, were frantically searching for those individuals who might have a connection to those we left behind. I shared this with you to let you know that although we really did not think this communication was probable when we were alive, we suddenly became like scared mice in a labyrinth with shifting walls and blocks when we realized we were dead. We, of course, saw the reality of it coming upon the impact of the explosion and then the fiery descent back to Earth. But once we really knew we were dead, oh no. So although our bodies lay at the ocean's demise, we were rescued by some energy. Very interesting. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Jeanne and Regina. Jeanne was raised as a Quaker, went to the University of Pacific and Whittier College, and felt the presence of spirit at a young age. Her channeling is described in John Climo's book, Channeling, if you've read that book. She's deeply linked to the spiritual world and is a master of use of tools to transform energy systems of the body, mind, spirit, to release past traumas and suffering. And you'll see some of this tomorrow at the workshop. With regard to Regina, she's had the most marvelous education of all, spirit. And I mean that in a very good sense, because that's where all knowledge is from, basically. She talks about herself as an alchemist, and she really truly is an alchemist. She transforms the energies, enabling them to be written, automatic writing, channeling, healing. Her education is really from the cosmic source. And she talked about playing with light balls, energy balls as a toddler. And we'll have to ask her those questions later on to find out what she was learning and what they were saying. She was reared in the Roman Catholic school. Her true knowledge is really her spiritual education. Both Jeanne and Regina are special divine beings, and I'm very happy to introduce Jeanne and Regina. Thank you.
Wow. Geez. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to run a slideshow here. And bear with me because I've never done this before. So Jeannie's going to...
I've done everything. I just need to listen now.
I don't think so. I'm going to sit back here. Let's see if this works. Whoa. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. No. I was on play. All right. Which one?
We'll see.
Oh, sorry. I had it backwards.
Okay, let me get...
That's what happens when you're dyslexic. Okay.
Well, while they're figuring out the mechanics, which is probably a lot more technically difficult for us than talking to dead people, it's been quite a ride. It's overwhelming to see all of you wonderful people here interested in a story that's been ongoing for many, many years. And as an introduction, we thought we'd put up each one of the astronauts, and these are the most recent thoughts for us because our relationship with them is ongoing. So, Richard Scobie, experience your quiet to the maximum. You just never know who might be out there trying to be heard, and their story may just change your life.
Sorry, guys.
We'll use that.
In case you didn't get this the first time.
All these quotes just came in the last two weeks. The astronauts are very much present with us and have been with us. Like, it sounds really bizarre, but like buddies, like friends. They show up when we're not looking for them. We're riding in the car, and all of a sudden they're in the back seat. Talking to us, eating Twizzlers, doing stupid things.
Michael Smith was the pilot. Explore to know what you do, not understand. Seek to find more. Embrace each and every moment with curiosity. Expand your attitude. Laugh. It will make the dark and bitter become palatable. Create peace with truth so that fear does not walk before you. Poignant words for right now in our world.
I'm going to say something regarding all of these quotes that have come through now. This is not how they felt 30 years ago. This is a real progression and a remarkable journey that they walked on the other side with us and with everybody involved. They've shown us so much more, and I think vice versa, by walking with so many people here that are still here looking for them as far as looking for direction and stuff. So these were remarkable quotes when they were coming through to us.
And this was taken out of other writing that they gave to us because Jerry had asked us, well, are you still hearing from them? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So this is great, Jarvis. We had not foreseen the magnitude of what was being channeled. Its continuation. When those great government agencies want something erased, it doesn't take much effort. What a tribute to the power and stamina of you all. And they're referring to the small group of people who have been connected to this material for so long. I cannot thank you enough for your perseverance in this matter. Indeed, beyond the information of the words lies the energy of life which is spoken of in so many terms. It will be what it needs to be. The energy still stands. Never walk farther than you can see, but trust that the inner light can go much further than the human mind. Trust that you can remove self-doubt, fear, and concern, all with the understanding that you will seek the higher ground in all of this and become more than the scientific community pursuing some very interesting phenomenon. Ron has my heart. Love. All there is love. For you and all the others who are involved in various and assorted ways, those who are with us to help and those who are still with you, love. To say I love you seems small, but to say love as a circle of life, that is where my emotions are sitting. Sorry, you guys can't see that over there. Krista. Do not be afraid of this new door you are all walking through. Do not fear the past. And when the time became right, our dear friend Bob Shacklet reached through the heavens and whispered in the ears of those Bay Area scientists and said, now it is time. Now. And the rest is history.
That's it.
Can't put into words what our lives have been like since January 28th, which was my mother's birthday, 1986. We were young, not too newlyweds, but pretty well newly married with young children, trying just to move our life through. Each of us in our own way, having our own training and our own belief system, when we were called to be connected with this whole situation. And going through material for this event tonight, I came across something I'd totally forgotten. This is how guided we all are if we allow ourselves to remember. When I was younger, and my kids were younger, I never had a moment during the day to sit down and do any kind of writing. It was all about taking care of everything. So Spirit would wake me up at the odd hours of the morning. I just love that. So I have on my handwritten 3:50 a.m., November 17th, 1985. Greetings, it's probably Seth. And good morning. Your preparation is beginning for an intense spiritual journey designed to bring you more closely to your God self. It is important at this time that you use every caution in discipline, mentally and physically, in order to open up, once again, the chakras of energy into a different level of awareness. At times, it may seem as if you are being played with. In a sense, you are, but only to ensure your growth and your higher development. It is always with the full consent of your inner spiritual nature. Remember that your spiritual sojourn intensifies from time to time as the need arises, and lessens its intensity when the need no longer exists. I haven't found that to be true yet. Remember, to help a friend is to help one's self. It is only fair and natural to offer yourself to someone in need, remembering that you are sharing the role of student and teacher. A spiritual odyssey with universal gifts awaits you. Prepare ye. Little did we know.
That was December.
That was November 1985. So it was 2 months before this. So we shared a lot of stories about things that we had, because they wanted us to share stories about what it was like after. And then we totally forgot them. Because there were so many. But what I want to share with you tonight is how Regina and I first met. She and her husband were from the Southern California area. I lived in Southern California. But we did not meet each other until we lived in, actually, Aptos, California. And I was recently divorced, and I had a little daughter that was 6 months, yeah, just adding 5. And I was into the New Age metaphysical stuff, and doing unity and science of mind, and it was so exciting because I never went into the metaphysical to be psychic. I went into it to be spiritual. I had a deep knowing inside of me that there was this incredible energy and source, and I wanted to explore it and to define it in my life. So part of that was wearing a pyramid on my head. And my mobile home, it was a mobile home, please, had a nice big window, and it was an open pyramid, so it just sits on your head. You're supposed to get enlightened. You put it over your food that was supposed to transcend things. And I'm walking around my little living room space with this pyramid on my head, and this woman walks by and she knocks on my door, and she looks at me, and I have the pyramid over my head. And my little daughter is chewing on a footstool. And that was her first experience with me. And she said,
Where have you been all my life?
Destiny. So that's how it started. And we both had our second babies, carried them at the same time, and
I did not wear the pyramid.
no, she did not. I don't think her husband would have allowed that.
She wore the pyramid in the family.
I was that person. But a wonderful friendship developed. You know how it is when you meet somebody and you've known each other forever. And we'd spend as much time together as we could. And they moved out of that mobile home park into a home, so they were from Aptos into Santa Cruz, a little further away, but we got together quite often. And we started talking, and lo and behold, she was really interested in this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, yes. So another relationship started, and I shared with her what I knew. And the rest is history in that regard, too. So that's how I met Regina. And then we moved all over the country until we landed into Michigan, southern Michigan. And my work had been with rescue for spirits who had passed over suddenly, tragically, through suicide, etc. And when the Challenger went down, I thought, and I said to my husband, I said, we just really need to sit down with them tonight and pray for them like all the other people across the world were doing. Interestingly enough, I got a lot more than I bargained for. And that's when Krista showed. We didn't record anything because we had no idea what was going to happen. And I won't tell you how she was, because she's like, don't tell them that. But Krista and I are only four months apart in age. She's the older one. And both school teachers, Scots-Irish background, music, she sang, played the piano. And prior to that moment in time, in December of 85, my family and I were out visiting for Christmas, and my daughter at the time was 5½. And we were out walking just to have a nice little outing with the family, and she got really upset. And she said, Mommy, you just can't leave me. You just can't leave me. You just can't die. You just can't die. And I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I know I'm fine. I know everything's okay. But she was insistent, and of course we knew that children at that age often feel that as part of their growth and maturing. But this was different. So I reassured her, but it was until after the accident I realized that Krista and I were already sharing space. Because her daughter was the same age as my daughter. And Kylie was already picking up Krista leaving. Oh, there's a lot of little synchronicities like that that are pretty amazing. So many stories, but I think one I really love, and I was sharing at dinner last night. You know, when we were channeling, it was in the day of the landlines, no cell phones. You talked to each other on Sunday because it was too expensive any other day of the week. And so she and I didn't talk all that much. We might have had letters and once in a while talking. But Ellison Monosuka was channeling some information. I couldn't tell you now what it is. I'd have to look up the stuff. And he said, well, I'm going to finish this with Regina. We're clear across the country. I'm in Michigan. She's in Santa Cruz. And so at some point, and I don't know, it was a week or two later, there we go. And Ellison starts and continues the whole story through her. She had no idea until we compared notes later on about the situation. In the 80s, it was really kind of a bad word to say that you were a channel. Everybody was making fun of Shirley MacLaine. And, oh, you're one of those. And there was just a lot of disregard for any of the information that was there. So it was very traumatic for me, and I know Regina will share her part of it, to even say I was doing that, except with a small, special circle of friends, because I just wasn't strong enough to withstand that kind of criticism when I was having such an impassioned experience with these people. So we kept it as quiet as we could. We spoke at different unity churches, people who were interested, and other places, thinking this message just has to go out, just has to go out. That's so wonderful, you know? In that time period, of course, FMBR picked it up and found that there was a lot of valid information that had been translated, and it was worth their looking into and exploring. The thing that became the most difficult, because I was so naive, we were all really naive about the government and their agencies and what their motives and agendas are. You know, it's pretty open. But back then, I wasn't very keyed into that. Senator Pell's office in Rhode Island had a paranormal research circle of people. and one of his aides, Scott Jones, somehow he was found, and so we started presenting taped material to him about what the astronauts were experiencing and what they were going through. And, oh yeah, that sounds great, you know, when we were videotaping and we're doing this. Oh my God, we just threw ourselves into the lion's den without ever realizing it. He called me one day and he said, well, you know, Ms. Love, it's not that your information is inaccurate, it's very accurate. But you know, the nation's been really embarrassed about this event. So if you could just, you know, tone it down a little bit, maybe give some kind of package to the families. And I went, oh no, this is not good. So we just backed out, but it was too late. They knew who we were, and it was a very difficult journey after that. I think I'm going to leave it right there, and you can say your...
Say my part?
Yeah, say your part.
Well, I'm not sure where to begin. So, first of all, everything Jeanne told us about the triangle pyramid, it is true. It's our children's favorite story about how we met each other. And it seems like that story is getting bigger and bigger every time.
The pyramid's getting bigger.
The pyramid's getting bigger. It has not made it to my head yet, but it's getting there. But Jeannie introduced me to channeling, which I was unaware of. Never heard of it, was totally unaware of it. I already had no idea I was doing it because I was uneducated in what the terms of it already were. But I was doing it with writing and with the healing work and with the energy work I was already doing. But when I was with Jeanne, she began to really help me understand all the voices I was hearing, because I was hearing so many voices all the time. It's as if all you guys are talking at the same time, and I cannot. Am I too loud? Oh, okay. Up? All right. So it's as if all the voices are at the same tone, and so it's just a lot of noise. And it was really deafening to me. So what Jeannie really helped me to do is start really focusing on what was the voice that I needed to be hearing. And the only way to do that is to really go in deep inside and really ask for your guidance, which is your spiritual guidance, because not every voice needs to be heard, because a lot of it's just gibberish. So she really helped me with that. But that didn't come until shortly after the Challenger thing. I was invited to go visit Marcel Vogel. Some of you may or may not know him. And I didn't know who he was. I'm not educated in any of the sciences. So I thought, oh, what the heck? And because what he wanted to do is show me that he was working on some water stuff and changing the water with intent. And he had all these machinery and equipment, and he had his new electron microscope he was so excited about, and he was showing me all these things, and he was showing me, wanted me to play with my aura, spatial energy, and he would test it, and he'd go back over there and run this like Geiger counter. There it is, there it is, there it is. You know, and we'd bring it back and forth. We were having a good time. I was just playing. I had no idea what it all meant. And I didn't know that he was an anomaly in it itself, or a genius. So he went, and we were in a little teeny dark room, and he was showing me how he was intending. He says, okay, let's put intent into this water, and we were going to put something in. And next thing I knew, I was doing this, and next thing I knew, I was Dick Scobie. And this was probably about 3 days after the Challenger had exploded. And I thought, well, this is strange. I've got a man in me. It was the first time it had experienced like that. And he proceeded to tell Marcel what happened. He talked about the O-ring, the temperatures, the fuel. He just went through this whole thing. And Marcel had a ton of science questions that he had answered. Of course, this is not on tape. And he told the secretary, go get a pencil and paper. And so she ran out, comes back in, and she wrote gibberish. Nothing that was said was what was communicated. It was bizarre. It was so bizarre. But anyway, that was my first experience from Scobie. And he proceeded to come through quite a few times. And usually when I was by myself, it was through writing, through handwritten stuff. But he did come through with the FMBR as well as some of the others. And the interesting thing for me with each one of these experiences, I had nothing personally identifiable, like Jeanne is as an educator. I really didn't identify with any of these guys except they're adventurers, and I'm an adventurer. But that was about it. There was nothing to identify myself. So when each one came through and entered in me and talked through me, I was floored by their brain. The amount of knowledge each one of them had just floored me. I was so excited to be able to have this brain, even if it was for a moment. I was really stoked. I mean, wow, I'm smart. And it was very monumentally short time. But and then when it came out, I was me again. So it was an exciting time, and it was a scary time, because like Jeanne said, it wasn't something you really shared. Santa Cruz, everybody was a channel, everybody was a psychic, and everybody was a massage therapist. Oh, is that what you do? No, it's not what I do. But with that came some very incredible people, absolutely incredible people. And unfortunately, some of my most favorite are over on the other side, standing in this room, but they're on the other side. And a few of them are still here. But they provided an incredible, safe environment for me to be who I was and am. And it's very emotional, because I don't get that opportunity at all. And it's really hard not to be able to be who you are. So thanks. La-da-da-da-da-da.
I'm sitting here thinking about everything I was going to say, but I want to say this part. I think we're really well this way because we've known each other forever. And when Jerry said, do you know where Regina is? Laughing. We're best friends in heaven. The importance of tonight is not only to tell you our stories about what it was like for us afterwards, but to bring you the energy that the astronauts bring, not only the ones from the Challenger, but from the Columbia, and the other ones that have gone before, the other scientists like Marshall Peace and Richard Feynman and Bob Schaffer have gone before, who have really, in their enthusiasm and joy and love, have brought the opportunities for this material to come forth. And I know that the seven, they get a little quiet and shy. As much as they want everybody to know everything, I'm sitting here going, boy, I'm a little quieter than I was last night. What's that about? It's because they're here in full form, and they're very personal in that regard. Are you not hearing me? Oh, I don't have a mic. I just was talking because I'm a school teacher. I can do this.
What's interesting is, and I'm sure Jeanne has figured this out already, we've got quite a few of the Discovery team is also here that lost their lives.
Columbia.
The Columbia, yeah. Pardon me, the Columbia. And, but the Challenger crew is here, and they're all in Hawaiian shirts. They said they're sick of these uniforms. The others are in uniform so that we can identify them, because we don't see them very often. But the Challenger crew, they're all in Hawaiian shirts. So give them applause that they're here, and we want to thank you guys for showing up.
Yeah, they do a lot of humorous things. This is a big circle for them to complete as well, because they had promised us, if you read some of the material on the website, that they were going to keep their personalities intact until this was completed. And of course, we had no idea what that meant. We're starting to get that understanding now. Absolutely, today we got a lot of that understanding at dinner, as a matter of fact. When Sally Ride came to us and said, Well, now we can tell you the rest of the story. So that's going to be something that's going to be coming forth with. But what she did share to us was the fact that it was no accident that the Challenger crew was brought to us. Dick Scobie said, you know, we didn't choose her. We didn't choose Regina. That undertaker energy, that personality brought them to us. We found out years later, as part of our research, much later, information that I totally had forgotten about, that it was what they did all the time. The cosmonauts were trained this way, so were the astronauts. There was always one of the astronauts who was trained in telepathic communication in case the comm lines went down. It had just really gone over my head for some reason, and a couple of years ago I picked up the book again that it was talked about in, which is the discoveries about psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain by those two women. That was written a very long time ago. And I just finally put it together, and I thought, well, who was the one that was trained?
And so that, I didn't know she was going through that, or even thinking about that. And so I'm driving down my dirt road, which is 2,000 miles from Jeanne, and I have a 10-mile dirt road to go to before I hit the paved road. So I'm just cruising along and bouncing along. Greg Jarvis is here. What the are you doing in my car? I mean, this is last year, sometime last year. And he goes, I got to tell you this, so you better pull over. Okay, now I'm by myself, mind you, and there's nobody for 10 miles on this dirt road, but I'll pull over. And he says, I just want to let you know, I was the astronaut that was trained to be, quote unquote, the psychic on their mission. And I said, what are you talking about? I was unaware of what Jeanne was already researching. And he said that he had been trained he was pulled out of the group. He was selected out of the 7 to be trained with these psychics or paranormals and to try to do communication remotely and stuff like that. And it was to be done in case they lost communication via the, what's it called?
Comms.
For doing the
Communication,
comms. Just lost communication while they were in the ship. And he didn't really think it would work, but they trained him anyway. And he was having a little success, but he really didn't give it much thought until it actually happened. And he was the one that they were trying to communicate. And he said he was trying to communicate back to Earth. Only he's dead, and when he was learning it, he was supposed to be alive communicating back to Earth. So that brought in a whole nother factor to which they were not really trained for or aware of, and certainly didn't have any kind of skill. And he wasn't supposed to tell the other crew members who was the psychic, who was the
NSA trained, yeah.
The NSA trained guy. And I didn't find out the rest of the story until Richard Scobie came through, what was it, 2 weeks ago? To tell me what exactly happened after that. And that was really interesting.
Well, I first was in contact with, when they first came to me, I kept saying to my husband, I said, you know I wasn't the initial psychic that was supposed to handle this. I always had that feeling, but I never understood what that meant until much, much later on. But it also meant that when we were sending all this information to Senator Pell's office, our cover had been blown because we were not supposed to be the ones connected to all their heavy industrial information that was supposedly, privileged. So we became targets, and that was the part of it, and the part of this story that remained so scary to all of us. And I have mixed feelings about going into how dire it became, because it was really very scary. You couldn't write stories about this. You can't make this stuff up. But in the 80s, because of all this psychic development, the Montauk people, if you know anything about Montauk, they had people who were trained to look energetically for people like us who were channels. and to scramble their energy fields and to redirect them so they would bring in false information so they couldn't bring in whatever truth was coming from the higher beings and the higher levels of consciousness to help right the planet. So that just created a whole bunch of can of worms for us because suddenly we were known, we were being watched, and we were being infiltrated. And so the tip of the iceberg was Scott Jones just saying, oh, well, you know, we've embarrassed enough and I got the reading that I better get out. But it was really too late. They already started the work on a lot of levels. And so when Jerry came to us and said, oh, we want to do all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, no, because we'd spent a long time hiding. And I don't advertise my work because it's people referring. So I know the people that come to me are interested in whatever is available. So that changed the parameter of things a little bit. And last night it was funny because they said, oh, well, you know, we're going to record tonight. I'm like, well, I didn't know that. And then I heard someone say, well, you've come this far. You know, what's the difference? It's time not to be scared about it. My kids are older, but they're all still traumatized from it. And I won't go into the gory details unless you ask me questions. I lost a marriage, a family. I have a daughter that's dead partly because of that. Another daughter who has struggles with severe bipolar issues. There's always a genetic stream in the family, but the energies were definitely psyops energies that came in. And Regina has her own stories. We had phenomenon, crazy phenomenon that happened. And not understanding, even though I had so much wonderful training, this is way beyond anything any of the teachers I had ever experienced could share with me. So now after 30 years, it's about time I think we step out and have the courage to give them their due, give us our due, and give everybody the due that they deserve from all the work and being here. But through all of it, if there's any message that I get from working with the Challenger crew is, like Ron McNair said and all the others, explore, love, be. Don't be afraid. Get into this journey. Because there are only two things in this world, love and fear. There are all the different qualities of fear, hatred, bigotry, anger, resentment, etc. And then there's love. There's compassion, joy, happiness, forgiveness. And it's constantly up to us how and who we choose to be. And so from that experience with all of that chaos, I had to formulate a new part of myself. Who did I want to be? How was I going to carry this message without using the Challenger as my thing? And that was really getting into human consciousness, into love, into healing, into bringing in the energies from the galactic beings, if you will, from deep within our heart space, and transforming. Be ye prepared, I was told, in November of 1985. So that's where the workshop then leads tomorrow, because then we've been working with all the ways to help the earth raise its vibration, and to do that, of course, as individual, to help all of us individually clear our stuff. And I'm sure there's a lot of you in this room that do a lot of your own teaching and have your own skills. But this is a great opportunity for you to come and do some really deep, amazing work through the heart into the sound of the dodecahedron, which carries the 12, versus the triangle and the 3. So it's all sacred geometry, which has to do with my daughter who passed. And that you have to find out tomorrow because it's all wrapped around the window children and the dodecahedron. So that's my little teaser. But I would like you to share what you had happen to you being involved with this.
Well, I don't know if I want to. Okay, 3 things. We talk about the darkness and the chaos, and Jeanne had mentioned the NSA, and a lot of stuff I said, oh, that's just Jeanne. You know, I really poo-pooed so much because I didn't want to admit to myself that so many things were really happening to me because of all this. And then when I really took myself back to certain things, certain incidences that really happened, and put the whole piece together and really re-looked at it. I never had mentioned to Jeanne till just probably a year ago that I had been shot at after one of my workshops. And then she started asking me questions. Well, didn't you hear it? Didn't the cops come? Didn't something happen? Yeah, everybody scattered. I had a couple of guys who were part of the workshop, and they were Vietnam vets, and they're the ones who told me we're being shot at. But it was like little bullet, and a little but the plaster behind me was really exploding and hit me. I just hit the ground and went over to the car, and these guys took off. The rest of the entire workshop was gone, and I was the only one there, and it's still going at me. I get home, and I tell my husband, and he doesn't believe me. Nobody shoots anybody in Santa Cruz, you know. Where are the cops? Where are the cops? And it didn't dawn on me, the guy had a silencer. That was the big thing. That was the reason. Because I took my husband over to the wall, and he said, oh my God, these are gunshots. These are BBs, but they're gunshots. And the cars, yeah. And then, this is where spirit really talks to me. I mean, as I was told Jerry Jeanne in my little bio, that I have been getting messages from spirit since before I could walk. And since I was in school, and talking to me and telling me what I should be doing or shouldn't be doing. So on another occasion, I had been doing a different workshop, and I was coming back, and I got in the car, and I had about 10 miles to drive, and I got on the freeway, and I heard, as loud as day in this car, you're being followed, be very careful. I'm on the freeway. Nobody's on the freeway, and then there's this set of headlights, and they followed me for 10 miles off the freeway, into the suburb, into the area, into my house, all the way to the house, going, and I'm laying on the horn. Nobody comes out in the neighborhood. I'm going, God damn it. And the car pulls around and turns around. It's a big black Suburban. He just opens his door, looks at me, point right at me. And I just felt bad. I felt really sick to my stomach. And then he drove off. And it's just weird. It was just weird. And then there were other events that had happened. So that's when I decided there's no more of it. I just shut it down. No more of it. I'm not doing anything that has to do with anything. I'm just not doing it. Because then there were all the other things that comes with it. You're the worshiper of a devil. You're doing this. You're doing that. There was just so much atrocities that goes with it. I just shut down, and Edie reminded me of this, and I had totally forgotten. I'd come back to I'd left Santa Cruz to take care of my mother back in Nebraska with my husband, and I'd come back, and I saw Edie a couple of years later, and she asked me, what was I doing? And I said, Edie told me, I said, nothing. I'm quit. I ain't doing anything anymore or any of that stuff. And so for 15 years, I hadn't been talking to anybody about anything. I was still hearing the voices, still listening to the words, still being directed by spirit and all the rest of the things. But I didn't let anybody know. I didn't talk about it to anybody. And it's nearly killed me because I was holding it all inside. And it's like having to wear dark glasses in a room all the time, and you just can't see anymore. So I got my glasses off today, and I can see, and I'm feeling good, and I'm here, and I just want to thank you all for letting me be here. Is that what you wanted?
Well, and the last part of that, in terms of her re-entry, when my second daughter passed away 6 years ago, it was a very traumatic event, and there were a lot of issues why it happened. But we were on the phone constantly because she's my sister and she cares about the family. And she had her own challenges going on because of stuff, but she was still on the phone with me. And my daughter's death brought us back to life again, actually, in some ways, and reissued a new contract, if you can look at it that way. Because I had lost my daughter at the age of 31, I needed to know why this was happening. We had come through horrible things because of these PSYOPs programs against the family. My husband had a nervous breakdown. He ran out in the middle of the night. He left the family, left me with 4 children. My oldest got all sorts of things happened to her, and she was abused. We had years of just one horrible thing after the other. we were finally getting our lives back together again, and then Kylene went down. It took 3 months. We think it's Agent Orange related because her dad was a Vietnam vet, and he has 100% disability because of Agent Orange. But there was more to it. There was a lot of energy stuff that was going on. But because of this, Regina stepped back even more than she normally would and helped me and helped the family walk through this. And that brought us into that circle of realizing, okay, if she had to go, what needs to happen? Why? And then, of course, because Kylene was raised in a family like the family she was raised in with me, she started communicating with me immediately. And she said to me very early on, Mom, I couldn't stand the thought of you dying before you completed the job that you came in to do. She said, so I went over to make sure you got there. And everything just increased tenfold in terms of information, understanding. It was incredible. It was the hardest thing I'd ever want to go through, but it has been the biggest blessing. And it's really a lot of why we stand here today. And we're going to be talking about her and her group of people that she came in with, that we call the window children, and the sacred geometry they were supposed to bring in. But we've lost a lot of people, but we've also gained a tremendous amount. And we're stronger for it. I almost didn't want to stay. I've been through enough. But fortunately, I'm pretty stubborn. And I thought, well, I'm not going to quit now. So here we are. Here we are.
And there's a lot of people over there on the other side.
We don't do anything by ourselves. So is it question time?
Sure, whatever.
Question. Ah, good, easy, let's go. No. Anne?
What do you think the astronaut's purpose is in coming through you? I kind of got the idea that they were like staying together to, did they want their message to come out what really happened? Or do they also want to have a growth experience, or all of those things?
You go for it.
Did I do that?
Yes.
The question is, what was the reason they stayed around? What do they want us to know, the astronauts? Was it for growing? Was it to get the message out? I think it was all of those things. They were really angry. A lot of what they said to us early on was they had all this training to be this specialist and just be the top of the game, but they didn't know how to die. They weren't trained how to die. And that was like, they were really pissed off. I'm sorry, but that's the way it was. And
abandoned.
And abandoned. And they began to realize that they were carrying a payload that was not what they were told. And it has to do with all those, dark secrets that nobody wants you to know about. And they were very angry about they felt very used and very expendable. And they had such good hearts, and they were such hardworking people. And here's Krista, and she's going to go save everybody, and everybody wants to be a teacher again. And she leaves these 2 children who are very, very young. And when she came through me the first night, I didn't realize what was going to happen, but she came through, and she was inconsolable. I mean, if you can imagine, when she realized what had happened to her, and all she did was cry for her children. And she wanted to make that right. She had to come to some kind of a grip, and the people who were sitting in the circle who were trained to know how to work with people who had passed over suddenly were telling her, well, this had to be a choice. There had to be a contract in this. I'm sorry, I'm sitting down. I'm old. My feet hurt. And, it was hard for them to swallow that because they weren't oriented that way. That wasn't something that they would ever consider. So they stayed. They promised over the next few months with a lot of communication that they would stay and keep their personalities intact until they could complete this circle, this cycle. There was a time in 89, I think it was 1990, friends of ours were getting married in New Hampshire, where Krista's from. And so we took a trip there for the wedding. And one of my normal states of being out of my body, I'm sitting in the back of our van while my husband's driving, and Krista's in me telling him where to turn to find the house, to find her high school, to find all these key points. She directed him to all those places, and then to find the cemetery where there's the headstone for her. And it was emotional because as a teacher myself, I really related to her. They didn't really put flowers out for her. People brought apples. And yeah, it was wonderful. But she's the reason I actually went back into teaching, because I kind of had it for a while with the public school system. But she really inspired me to go back. She is a very, very inspirational woman, each of them in their own way. Beautiful souls, beautiful friends. And I think their goal, if anything, is to help people realize the continuation of life. Somebody asked Krista once early on, well, why should we believe in reincarnation? Why should we, believe these things? Why do we have to think that we'd come back again? And Krista said, well, if you realized that you'd come back again, you probably would be less likely to stab somebody in the back if you had to pay for that. And so it's as much educational as anything else.
I think for this whole process, Anne, about all the things that they were delivering initially, they were in so much trauma. It's very similar to our poor Vietnam vets, or any of the World War vets, any of our vets, or anybody who's gone through any kind of serious trauma. You have to come through the process of grief, personal grief, in order to get to the resolution. They weren't expecting to die. It was a routine trip. They've done it, this was Scobie's second trip, and the others had been promised. It's routine. They're not going to be put in risk. When all of a sudden they find that they are at complete risk, and especially when upon immediately, they had an understanding of what went wrong, and it was not their fault. It was not their piloting skills. It was the skills of the engineers. And Houston saying, go for it, basically, or Cape Canaveral.
It was money.
It was all money. So they became as expendable as our foot soldiers or anybody else. Their Air Force status, which in the military is quite up there compared to the Army. Army is down here. Air Force is way at the top. And they thought they're not expendable. Never expendable. And they found out they were immediately expendable too. And all the cover-up. So there was so much anger from them on their side. And they had to go through all of the same processes that we all go through when we're going through grief of losing somebody. And why me? Why this? Why now? It became a real communication skill where they had to learn to speak our language as well as the language that they only understood. They're geeks. They're science geeks. They're all geniuses. They're all brilliant in their own heart, but they had to learn to communicate with two regular Joes.
Should we tell them? Well, Ellison on Azuka, when he first came through the first couple of days, he was very, very put off by the fact that he was in a woman's body.
Oh, yeah.
And he was very, very uncomfortable with the autonomy. Oh, my God, I have things, and oh, my gosh. And, those are just things that they would never have considered ever for any reason at all. And they were very aware of the fact that I was not a guy. And a lot of just things you take for granted, people would say to me, well, why aren't you channeling the Grand Poobah of the third rock from the second star system on the Pleiades? And it's like, well, I do that too, but these people are our friends. They're our people, and they're here to make an impression, to help us to grow. And there's more from this that will come as time goes on. Another question, maybe?
Sure.
Right there, yeah.
Who's looking around? Hey, you.
Yeah.
You had a quote, and I believe you said it was a recent quote from Krista about opening the door.
Not being afraid to go through, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think she's talking about?
Well, she thought it was the greatest field trip ever. If you read anything about her, she was all about the field trip queen, teaching middle school and high school. And so that's how she won the competition to be the one that went up, because she was going to write the journal about being in space. And she's done so much writing through me. And I know the thing is that they have gone through other psychics, too, and other channels. And other people have been incredibly inspired by them. I don't know that they have the volume of material that we have, but I know that we're not exclusive. But for her, it's don't be afraid. You know, don't be in that technology of fear. Be in that technology of movement forward. Take a risk. Do something. You know, we're eternal beings. We live whether we're in this body or something else, and that's who she was. Go for it.
I just wondered if anything, if they are offering a current perspective of things that are happening now on the planet from their vantage point, like the big shift that we're going through right now. If they're bringing forth any of that.
Well, they're very much a part of it. We do have more longer writing that we just didn't put up here because when Jerry Jeanne asked about is it still ongoing, and then they decided, oh yes, we're going to speak up. So every one of them wrote 2 or 3 pages through each one of us. They'd been political enough, I think, when they first passed, but they are definitely part of a larger circle of light workers, very much so. And that's their goal, to help shift and to evolve and to change things. That's their big goal. Yes, yes, sir.
Did they tell you anything surprising about their circumstances? You've been talking to them now for 30 years, and they're in a very unusual situation. Have they shared with you the ins and outs of what it's like to be in a non-clerical situation? What have they told you that's surprising?
The stuff that's surprising is the stuff that we got initially right away, in terms of how they told us they didn't die right away, and all the details to what happened to the shuttle and such. You know, the phenomena of not being in a body. That's what led FMBR to take on the project, is because of the evidential information that came through 30 years ago. When we work with them now, it isn't necessarily as extensively about being without a body or anything. It's there's assistants. They come in and say, hello, how are you doing? We're working on this project. What are you doing? There's no surprise for me. What's wonderful is that they're still here and they're growing and continuing to evolve. But they haven't stepped in to say, oh, I have a secret to tell you about what's going to happen to the world next week. That hasn't been that kind of orientation for them. We have enough other spirits that tell us that, so we don't need their help with that. Oh, pictures. Evolution. You can tell how important Regina is to our family because my twins, I got to name one of them, and my husband got to name the other, and the other was named Regina. So I have a daughter named Regina, and they're very close. My daughter Kylene to the left is the one who passed away 6 years ago, and this is my daughter Jordana. This was when Regina had come out to do some videotaping that she didn't know she was going to do a year after the accident, and we have it on tape, all of us dual channels, if you will. And that's when I was invited to Europe in 1989 to be a guest speaker at a big Psi conference. And the interesting thing about Europeans is that they didn't give a flying finger about the fact that I was channeling Krista. They knew that that was possible because they do not have the baggage around the paranormal and the metaphysical world. Oh yeah, of course that's Krista. Oh yeah, of course that's, well, that's really great, blah, 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 blah. And it was a very powerful experience for me. There was a person there that really wanted to really step in my life and promote my skills, but because things were degrading at home and I didn't realize entirely why, I knew I couldn't step into that. But it was the weekend that the Berlin Wall went down, and we had 1,600 people at this conference. So there were a lot of interpreters, French, German, Spanish. I don't know if we had Portuguese, but it was powerful because we were all very connected to what was happening, and we were praying with them to see this wall come down. And there were a lot of German people there that were calling home and, where's the wall now? Where's the wall now? They got the champagne out. I mean, it was just an amazing experience. So that's part of it. Oh, there I am. That's up in New Hampshire when we went to her. You have to understand there wasn't anything left of her. You have to understand there wasn't much left of any of them. And you have to understand that I found out recently that Greg Jarvis, they didn't find his remains and they were going to just leave him in the ocean. And one of the other astronauts, I forget now, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the person, who's a close friend of his, said that's not going to happen. And he rented a fisher boat to go find his friend and bring him up. He had to bring his body back. And the poetry that's on the back wall, there's a poster. It's done by an artist named Anne Lloyd, She found us through John Climo's book, Channeling. And she actually came out. She lived in Bryn Mawr. She still does in Pennsylvania. And she came out when we lived in New York, and we started a lovely relationship. She was an artist. She was not a poet. And she got this poem in like 45 minutes, she said. And then she made this beautiful honor to them, and nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it. It was such a blight on our nation at the time. It was such an embarrassment that people just walked away from it. There are a couple other pictures there that she did that are very profound. So yes, and those are my two girls, Julie and Regina. You want to tell them about this one? This was at Edie's house when she was with Bob. Yes, in the dome. Yes. The Learning Channel, TLC, when it was starting, asked to record us for a half-hour program. Well, that was a joke. They recorded us for 2 days, and then we were up for 5 minutes. And they put us in the same category with Wayne Dyer and Carolyn Meese and who was it? And they were debunking all of them. All these really great names, they were debunking them, and that's what they were doing to us, you know. Whatever.
Amazing Randy.
Yeah, the Amazing Randy. There you go. So, you know, things have changed, fortunately. But that was one of the times we were there.
That's when I was a brunette.
Yeah. And I wasn't quite red yet, so there we go. Yes.
Hi. I'm completely new to this conversation. I was just curious. I saw this as a very young girl when that happened. So I'm asking you maybe basic questions that most of the audience might know. You mentioned something about some other being that took them. Could you tell me a little bit about this? And then also, what is it that's the secret? Or what was it, the payload? Or what is all this?
Military stuff. Star Wars stuff. Reagan stuff.
So were they purposely killed, or was it an accident?
A little bit of both, I think.
At what point did they die? You said in the water? Or?
In the water.
See, the compartment was thrown clear of the booster rockets. And in May of 1986, there was this picture in the newspaper, unannounced, without any explanation, and you saw the compartment coming down. And 3 of their backpacks had been turned on. That has to happen manually. So they knew what was going on. They did not die instantly. In fact, we had a little discussion with them. I didn't, because they were talking through me. I was the talking head, but they were saying, oh, we didn't die right away. And the 2 gentlemen in the room, oh, well, we saw you blow up. Oh, no, we didn't, you know, because they were not really dead until they hit the water. Yes, sir.
Is there reports that some of them were still alive when they hit the water?
Yeah.
And there's a naval ship that could see them through binoculars, that they were trying to get their attention, and that they were...
I hadn't heard that, but that wouldn't surprise me.
And the naval ship was told not to rescue them.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it just got real ugly. There's a lot of stuff that was hidden. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious if their families where do their families stand regarding the channel?
I'm glad you asked that question. Let me just tell you this real briefly. About a year after, we moved from Michigan to Lockport, New York, which is outside of Buffalo, because my husband got a teaching job there at a small liberal arts college. And they were going, the day that we actually took escrow of our home, they were doing a dedication ceremony for Greg Jarvis, because he had gone to SUNY Buffalo, and they were dedicating the engineering wing to him. So Greg was after me before this. Oh, you got to write a letter to my wife. You got to write a letter to my wife. Please do this. And I'm like, oh my God. Small children, we just moved. I was still really nervous about all of this, just really nervous about this, but I did it. I don't know how good it was, but I did it. We literally shoved all the boxes into the rooms of the house, had a babysitter, and my husband and 2 really dear friends of ours, we went to this dedication. There must have been at least 500 people there. And Seth, if you know Seth, he's been with us through the beginning of this, said, they know who you are, Jeanne. And I'm like, yeah, right, they know who I am. And he goes, no, they know who you are. So I was like, yeah, whatever. So, most of the people clear out, and there's Greg's widow, Marcia. And I have the letter, and I thought, whatever. And, most of the people were clearing out, and there's 4 of us, and she never looks at anybody else around me. She just sees me. She comes and puts her hand out to me and shakes my hand. I went, oh, she knows who I am. And I said, I'm just so sorry, but I'm glad this is happening, and I have a little letter for you, and that was it, and I walked away. 2 weeks later, a handwritten letter came back from her to me saying everything you said was absolutely wrong. And our friend so-and-so and such and such and so-and-so didn't do that. Well, I didn't know their names, but I knew the names in the letter because Greg identified them. And the other thing that was so funny was, oh, and Greg never gave me a book signing blah, blah, blah. Well, he had 2 master's degrees. I'm sure he gave his wife a book from time to time. So she was told to deny everything. And that was proof to me that she knew who I was and that they had talked to her. Otherwise, I never would have believed it. Other family members, I've not had any direct contact with any of them. But that was one of the reasons why we hesitated later on to put this material in a book, because I know that their families have been through enough. And I didn't want to reopen that. I know if we have suffered enough, I can't imagine what they've gone through. So, yes.
But why, who is it that doesn't want this information? I don't understand.
The big guys that run the show in the government, and they want to suppress all people who have any information that will change the chaos into the light. It's as simple as that. And anything that could hint at life continues on, there's communication, anything that would broaden the experience or the horizon of people, they don't want any of that, because you can't control people who are educated, who are exploring, who have understanding. We don't all have to agree, but we need to be able to move forward and realize the continuity of the universe as best we can. Every 100 years we grow a little more and a little more and a little more. And they didn't want the embarrassment of how they really messed up. I mean, it came out eventually, but not to the full degree of how their flight was sabotaged. There's 2 sets of tapes on any flight. There's the one that we hear as the public, and there's the one that we don't hear. And the one that we don't hear, there was stuff that finally got leaked about how Judy Resnick saw the fire. They knew going into that shuttle that it was not good, but they knew they couldn't walk out. What are they going to do? So they were hopeful at the first time, but then they were delayed, 3 or 4 times, and then finally went up. And they knew that this was not necessarily going to be good. I don't think they realized the extent of it. But that's the thing, and now supposedly we're a little more open with things, but not really. So they didn't want to suppress everything.
Has somebody actually briefed you on why the thing failed? I mean, do you have any? Did anyone ever explain to you the sequence of events that caused that rocket to fail?
Only the astronauts themselves, and that's all. A lot of it's in the writing.
The president's report that came out, that's really quite comprehensive.
Well, and Feynman was actually blackballed a lot too. There's this
Feynman did not know the whole story.
No, and they kept it from him. They kept a lot of information from him. Yeah.
The cover-up that is. I was with NASA at that time. I was studying wind shear.
Right.
Which is actually what brought down the spacecraft. There wasn't. Do you want to hear anything?
Absolutely. Would you like to?
President Reagan was very eager to get the thing launched.
Right.
Because he had a schedule to talk to the school teacher during the State of the Union message.
Right.
So Reagan was very upset that there had already been 2 delays. President Reagan was very upset that there. Is this mic on?
Yeah.
President Reagan was very upset that there had already been 2 delays in the launch of the spacecraft. But it was still very cold there, and it was like 10 degrees Fahrenheit below the minimum temperature because of the O-rings. and Lockheed, who was the ground supervisor, would not sign off. Lockheed could measure the O-rings with a remote thermometer. Right. So the ground personnel knew for a fact that it was too cold. And Lockheed said, no, we won't sign off on it on the third trial. So the president, leaning on NASA then went to Thiokol and said, we need an engineering assessment. So they did a calculation quickly, and the man who designed the O-ring, who has since written a book on it, I mean, this is not secret, that is, right. The man who made the O-ring at Thiokol and would not sign off on it has written a book on all what I'm telling you. And he said, no, I won't sign off. And the president's office said to the president of Thiokol, you write a variance for launching this thing, you'll never get another dollar from us. And he did that. He didn't want, he said, spacecraft has actually been launched with a frozen O-ring a couple of times previously, because they know that they could see some fire coming out from where the O-ring held the rocket to the spacecraft. So they know that there had been fiery leakage from cold launches in the past, but it seemed to go okay. On this time, you had a similar kind of cold situation. The O-ring was not pliable, which is what Feynman showed, but that had not been a catastrophic problem in the past. This time, though, at 35,000 feet, there was a ferocious crosswind, which is known as wind shear, which is what I was studying, which is how I happened to be involved in this. So there was a 200-mile crosswind that pulled apart the things that were burning and allowed that to turn into a blowtorch, and as a result, the spacecraft was burned away from the rocket that was supporting it, and the thing crashed. But basically, the conspiracy, if you will, is the president of the United States leaning on the president of Thiokol, saying, I don't care what the scientists want to say, we want it to launch. As I was sitting here, I read the Wikipedia description of this, and they said it was NASA's go for launch attitude, and the engineers at the Cape wanted to launch it, and that's not true. That is, everybody there was aware that it was well below the safe conditions for launching.
Including the astronauts knowing that it was well below. They knew. Yes, thank you for that.
The astronauts, no doubt, were aware that it was too cold to launch because you could see icicles hanging from everything.
Oh, yeah.
Had you ever talked to Edgar Mitchell, who was an astronaut who did psychic experiments from Apollo?
From the other side, yes.
From Apollo 14, and he died last year.
Right.
But he's a psychic guy, so I wonder if he ever talked to you.
From the other side, yes. He's part of all this team that's working together to help us move forward. But there was a definite cover-up. There was thank you for that information, because I hadn't heard the wind shear, but I knew that there was this big push from Reagan to launch, and that was definitely a part of it. Yes, Rick?
There's also talk about stressed metals, the way they were moving the shuttles via the 747 or whatever, where they would put it on there, that the way they would lift it, that the metals had stresses in that area of the rings as well.
Well, in the writing, there was a lot more. I don't remember it all now. You know, I'm more the human interest part of the story, but I know that they gave us as much as we could possibly use, being non-scientists, in terms of certain ideas about what had happened. But absolutely, yes.
I don't know if it'll be relevant. It's just in my brain. I can't get it out. How high did they get up before whatever happened? And I thought that it was exploded, or I mean, I didn't know. Meaning, was it just what Russell said?
72 seconds into the flight, which would be 35,000.
35,000 feet.
And it looked to everybody that it had exploded, but the compartment had not exploded. It had just been thrown clear.
It was ripped apart. You see, if it was an explosion, they'd have blown up the compartment.
Right.
In the published pictures of that, you can see a streak is going off at right angles.
Right.
And that's in fact a picture of the wind shear blowing the thing off the.
That's a great piece of information I hadn't had. Thank you.
Incontrovertible photograph showing what happened.
So there you have it. Any more? Yes,
It's not a conspiracy. No one's trying to conceal that information.
Well, not now, no. But at the time, it was hard to get all the pieces together, believe me. Yes, Oliver?
So, well, I'm curious, in what time and realm are they talking to you guys? Because we're all in this linear continuum here on this realm, and it seems as though they're progressing in what it is they're delivering to you, both in terms of spiritual content and prescient information. So, are they still in an exact linear time period? Are they aging with you? At what point and when are they communicating to you on their side of things? If that's
a good question about that. I never stopped to think about that because, for me personally, in my experiences, people come through all sorts of different places in time, and I don't necessarily say, "Oh, where'd you come in from?" In the seventh ray or the Purple Heart, or where were you? Personally, for me, it's all relative and it's perception. Everybody has their own ideas of what the other realms look like, the other realities look like, the developmental stages. There's all sorts of philosophies about the seven rays on this level and that level. All I know to say is that they've stayed somewhat earth connected, not bound, but connected. But they're very free to go off into other realms and other places to learn and grow. That's why they have. And there was, on the 25th anniversary, I had a channeling session with a small group of friends. And there wasn't much of them personality-wise that came in. That was kind of surprised me. They were just much more etheric and developed, which showed that other side of who they are, because we always leave a little bit of ourselves on the other side as we come into these realms. I could tell you what my experience is and where I thought they came from, but somebody else may have I saw them over here, or I saw that, They're in expanded consciousness. They have freedom to travel. They're very developed and aware. They've caught up to speed, things that they didn't necessarily honor. When Dick Scobie first passed and we were working with him, he said, I look like I have a toga robe on. And I had this angel that came and caught me. So for whatever reasons, he had that perception in his mind, that thought process that allowed that kind of experience for him to have. And each one of them had a different experience. Ron McNair couldn't remember his name when he came through the first time. I knew who he was, but over time, they've advanced. They've done voracious reading, they've gone to study things, they've gone to learn things, they've been helping, they're very much involved in helping the world situation. So wherever you want to place them, I don't know that we can fully quantify that. Yes, Mary. Are any of them planning to reincarnate? We had that discussion last night. Early on, there were certain elements of them that were coming back as young. But again, when we talked about the oak tree and the many leaves, they've kept enough of themselves over on the other side so they're identifiable. They haven't really said yet when or how they figure they're going to come in. There's another, if you have something.
Regarding to your question about what happened to them, or who was this energy? Do I need it really?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Regarding this young lady's questions regarding who whisked him away or what, and then it's also might address Oliver's question as well. Originally, when Dick Scobie came through me, There was no angel, nothing. It was him, period. And he didn't even go into that. All he did was talk about was the O-ring, the freeze, the icicles. And he didn't say anything about wind shear, but he was talking about the damage of the vehicle itself, and why it exploded when he was talking to Marcel Vogel. But the other day when he came through me to say how the process was as to how they were transported, it kind of blew me away because it was not what I first experienced with them. When Jeanne and I first channeled these individuals, we had their trauma. We experienced their drowning. We experienced the screaming. We were screaming. It was horrible. It was a nightmare for both of us. She experienced Krista's uncontrollable crying, the loss of not being able to contact your children. It was horrid. Absolutely horrid. I don't ever want to go through that again, but I have. I've experienced things like this again. It taught me a lot. But this I want to read to you because I can't explain it better than the way Dick Scobie explained how they were transported. He was talking about how... Okay. He said, but once we really knew we were dead, oh no. So although our bodies lay at the ocean's demise, we were rescued by some energy. Is this what you were talking about? Okay. It whisked us away from our horrible state of learned flesh and trauma, our watery grave. What a mess. We were put into a quiet state and given an opportunity to communicate with each other, to try to figure out what to do now, how to proceed. We are all scientists who really did not, up to this point, give death a real thought except to calm our loved ones and reassure them that we would be right back once the shuttle landed safely on the ground. It's all routine. Don't worry, June, I said to her before I left to join my crew. I will be back in no time and we will do all those things together, I assured her. All those family times that we had been putting off while I was in preparation for this flight. I had made her wait after my previous flight too, and when I returned from that one, I never took the time I should have with her, and I truly disappointed her. All routine, that is what we all thought and believed. Krista and the others, they did not worry, and if they did, there was no sign. Their trust was in NASA. There was no way that NASA would endanger the crew just for their own self-worth. Funny to say that now, but it is true. That is how we believed, and that is how we told our family. This trip was all routine, no big deal. And being that it was my second round trip, I was naturally the expert, and the rest of my team looked up to me for assurance. Was I surprised when we felt the big bang effect under our bodies? The shock wave of terror and disbelief, that would be to say it mildly. I am revisiting this event since now I can, without the anger, hatred, frustration that accompanied my earlier transmissions to the channels back home. Well, to get back to what happened when we died, the energy I speak of, well, that was rather indescribable, and it still is. I can say this, there was no comforting words of emotion from it, or real thought or compassion, no good or bad, no tisk-tisk, or sorry this happened feeling from it. This energy had a sense of an undertaker to me, that it was that's the nearest way for me to describe it. The way the undertaker took my grandfather away from his home. There was no emotional content, just an obligatory sorry, ma'am, and then he drove away. So I refer to this energy as an undertaker because of its non-judgment of the situation or of our bodies. Funny, now that I think of it, it wasn't touching our bodies. They lay in a mess in the ocean, but it took our energetic bodies. Anyway, once our energetic bodies were moved away from the scene of the accident, then we were able to communicate amongst each other. We tried to figure out what to do next. The now what process, I call it. That was when Greg told us that since he was dead, he could let us in on his little secret. which he had been instructed never to share. But since he was dead, who would really know anyway? And he wasn't sure it would really work. Well, if that didn't get our curiosity up, and I would say our hopes too. It is funny that I should be saying all this since we were dead, you know. And that did not even matter, because we were still thinking like a bunch of science nerds and problem solvers. I had also to tell you that Krista was a wreck, just a mom going crazy about what just happened. Her tears flowed freely, uncaring about what we were trying to solve. In all reality, she was probably the only normal, emotional member of the group. We really were just a bunch of science guys, and including Judy, all trying to figure out what to do. Well, back to Greg Jarvis and his little secret. He tells us that he had been training in secret with psychics contracted by the military to communicate with POWs behind enemy lines and other agents who were working around the world for the U.S. government. Some of these communicators, as they were called, were highly skilled in getting messages back and forth without use of radio or other wavelength-related operatives. Just through their mind, Greg had shared. He said he was trained with some of these communicators as a precautionary, the space agency would tell him, you know, in case the shuttle communication board happens to malfunction and we need to let mission control know what was going on with us. It really had not been said to use in case of death. But what the heck, Greg thought, why not? So that is how we came to communicate. And this still gets me back to the people, to the energy. We first tried, really, Greg first tried to contact the one communicator he liked the best of the trainers, but he could not seem to make that connection. Then he tried one by one. The others that he knew were in the business, but each time he tried, the process failed. He said he only remotely believed or thought it might work with his limited skills, but he had seen it be successful once in a while when he tried when in training. He thought maybe he just did not have the skill. So they all turned to me and asked me to try. Maybe someone would be more likely to listen to me if it was coming from the commander. Well, I really didn't believe it, but we did not have a whole lot of options of touching back with the living. So I, too, went through the same channels that Greg tried, and we failed. Krista, by now, was in heavy trauma, and we wanted to settle her down a bit. And Judy asked me to see if any of us could try to communicate. I assured them that this was way beyond my scope of learning or even belief system, and to give it a try. Well, just then, that undertaker energetic showed itself to us. It was an intangible sense of itself. So showing itself really does not cover this. But that is beyond the point. What happened was we found ourselves suddenly in the presence of Jeanne and her husband Tom and another male. Jeanne and Tom were talking and laughing, and then Jeanne sat quiet. That was when we realized, whoa, wait a minute, how did we get in this house? And more important, can they see us? Krista pushed herself right past us, and the next thing we knew, she had found her voice in Jeanne. The rest of the crew and myself were, needless to say, in a state of shock again. And that was the beginning, and it just kept happening. We were brought to individuals who could really feel us and let us inside so that we had a voice. At the time, we thought it rather strange that we were communicating with people who were outside our circle of education. But we were so thankful someone was listening that we just kept coming back for more. We really were going through a debriefing. We had to debrief. It was part of our training. Just these women, Jeanne and Regina, were not part of our thought realm or training, yet they were so willing to listen to our story and our trauma. So as the days progressed and the connection strengthened with these women, we became more comfortable. That is why the foundation members were brought into the circle. It was time for the truth to be heard, and those members could ask the questions that the untrained individuals could not. So Bob Shacklett, Edie Fisher, Bill Goff, Marshall Pease, John Fuller, and John Climo, their questions were calculated and scientific. We were among our peers again, and we were not going anywhere until we had said our piece. So that came through, and that was written in probably 15 minutes, 20 minutes. That whole writing, my hands were out of control writing that. And so, one second, in order for me to say to Oliver regarding time frame, when I was overwhelmed listening to what he was saying, and I'm going, what? How could you be doing all this and simultaneously be channeling Jeanne within a couple hours after the accident? Wait a minute, how did you try all these things? And then it realized, wait a minute, there's no time over there. They can do all of those things, and they were just discovering that at the same point. So it was such a discovery for me to read this and see this and learn this 30 years after the event. 30 years from the same individual who came to me originally to talk to Marcel Vogel, which blew me away because I didn't know Marcel Vogel, and I certainly didn't know this commander that was inside my body. And it was a phenomenal ride ever since, and it's been going on. And even though I went under a rock out in Nebraska and didn't channel or didn't do anything, these guys have been with us all the time. It's amazing. And they've been waiting for us to come out from under the rock. Yeah, Mary.
Jeanne, I'm sorry, I was asking time. Can you repeat that, Mary?
Any extraterrestrial ET-type consciousnesses come through as well with them? In other words, were any ETs involved?
Oh, that's a whole nother night. Yes. Yes. Yes, there's a plethora of beings that have worked on this. Yes.
Well, I won't take the whole night. I'm wondering, over the last 30 years, besides the disaster and the X's and O's around it, have they been communicating to you where they're currently at, their living conditions, what they're doing day to day? Are they in homes? Are they in communities? How are they existing day to day? Do they tell you anything about that?
Well, yes and no. It shouldn't be that hard to answer, but they're definitely spiritual beings, and they definitely are in places where they're having learning experiences. They hang around their family. They're there when grandchildren come in, and there's big events. You know, they haven't gone into other realms and other forms. If that's what maybe you're asking, they have stayed at a worldly frame, although there's many levels within this area where they can exist and coexist and learn and grow. It's a kind of an as-needed basis. They don't pop in all the time because we've gone on to other things with other beings and extraterrestrials and cosmics. But they come in from time to time like an old friend and say, oh my God, how you doing? I saw this happen and that happened. But it hasn't been a continual plethora of writing over the time. After they got their initial stuff out, they would come through from time to time, only if they were there to bring us some information about something that was happening, help us assist with a family situation, just their little input on it, tell us what they're working on at the time. But it hasn't been a daily or even weekly or monthly situation. One time that was really very powerful for me, as they, you know, how sometimes you just don't see friends for 10 years, you know, and all of a sudden you call each other up again and suddenly you're all best buddies. Just before my daughter went down with the first stroke she had, it was just around the time of the Challenger anniversary again, and I went to see my other daughter who was in rehab, and she had a little pass so we could have 4 hours. And I got in the car and I was just very, very emotional. I couldn't figure out why. I was just really not doing well. I didn't have any outward reason for it at the time that I thought. So I'm picking up my daughter from her little place that she's living in for the time being, and I'm crying, you know, just kind of uncontrollably. And I said to my oldest daughter, I said, oh my gosh, you know, Krista and JR, Judy Resnick, are so tangible to me, I could touch them. And I hadn't felt them that strongly for a very long time. And I thought, well, maybe it's because their anniversary, but I usually don't get that emotional that way about it. And she felt them too. She wasn't mad at me that day, so she allowed herself to say she felt them, and was kind of overdone by two the whole day. And it wasn't, what, 8 or 10 days later that my daughter went down. They knew my daughter was going to go, and they were in there to help me and to console me. So that's the kind of contact I've had more of. If we had some kind of continuing contract to write more stuff or to get more information down, I'm sure it would be more consistent. Although it looks like there are some things that are coming up now that we've just received information about that will continue, but that hasn't actually happened yet. I don't know if that answers that effectively for you, but yes.
You, I wasn't here at the very top of the meeting, but do you just take in, document, and then retell what they tell you, or do you come in with some questions, some specific things you would like to know personally to impart on humanity for their growth at large?
That's a good question, but no, I don't, to be honest. Yeah, no, because I work with so many other beings and so many other spirits that would be considered maybe, how do I say this? Not that they aren't advanced now, but that wasn't their original placement. And we get a lot of spiritual direction and guidance from other beings as well. So they retain more of their humanity, even though they have a lot of growth in there. So I don't know if that explains it well, but I've never felt that I've needed to ask them. They usually come with information that's usually of a personal nature, and they know I'm willing because they're like friends. I mean, I can't explain this enough. Really advanced, wonderful friends. And yes, so wait a minute, let's see. Let's go over here.
Thank you. You had both mentioned that the astronauts, when they first passed, felt kind of, you know, what are we doing here? Where did my body go? And the Undertaker came in. Has your experience been with other souls that have recently passed? Do they have the same experience?
Well, that's a good question. If other ones, I was trained in rescue work as a psychic. Well, I don't like the word. As a spiritual medium, I guess is what I really like. That's why we sat down to help them. When I have worked with people who have passed suddenly through accident, suicide, several suicides, there's always the trauma around it, even if it doesn't last as long. The thing that happened with the 7 is that because it was a worldwide event, one of the reasons I figured out too that we were called to help them is to help buffer the enormity of the grief and the sadness, because it was a worldwide event. It wasn't just a family member down the street that you'd have a normal range of grief and sadness. This was something that collectively everybody was experiencing, and lots of people had experiences. People would come up to me and said, "Oh, I had this experience and I had that experience," and it went everywhere because it's part of enlightening us. You know, whomever can come through, whether it's the 7th Ray or it's Archangel Michael or it's Dick Scobie, it's all about helping us evolve and to reach beyond ourselves. So, does that help?
Sort of. How about the person who is more spiritually cognizant and then passive, so they're more...
Like George Harrison, he spent his whole life trying to die nicely. And if you watch the documentary that Scorsese did about him, because they were good friends, when Olivia, his wife, tells about how when he did pass, there was all this light in the room. George had all his little devils that he had to work with, but he also had this beautiful spirituality, and he was going to die well, and he did. So, you know, but that was his intention. That's what he went with. I don't necessarily have to work with the people who are already there, because they don't need me, because they know how to do it. You know, it's just the people who get lost or have a sudden situation happening. Yes?
Do you ever have trouble kicking all these, you're kind of like an open book. Do you ever have trouble kicking these people out, or they're too intrusive? Or?
Not the 7, but there are others that are no, 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 no. You know, no, they're welcome anytime. They do not misuse the door. They're very,
able to shut down the ones you don't want?
oh, yes. Oh, yeah, we learned how to do that a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes.
Do you have a record of what the scientists here had to say to the astronauts?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that one more time?
Said that there was a conversation between the astronauts and some terrestrial scientists, Marshall Pease and Bob
Shacklet. They were members of FMBR.
Is there a record of what they had to say to each other?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Bill Goff is right over here, and he was part of the original. Yes, they did a lot of recording. That doesn't necessarily get up on the web page. But
Let me fill in. You're asking what happened in the beginning. How did we get going on doing this project? First part was that there appeared a document which was sent by Jeanne Love to Edie and Bob Shacklet, and Bob Shacklet knew the person that sent it, and we all read it, three of us first. And when we read that document, we didn't really know if this is real. I mean, the foundation had been working, this is right at the beginning. We had been working on psychokinesis and remote viewing, and we had a report on that, and it got into the congressional records. And then we hadn't thought anything about life after death or the continuation of life, except this document arrives. And in that document is this whole Challenger story. Now, as we read it, I wondered if it was real, because it was beginning to challenge my old belief system, which as an engineer and physicist, I believed more that we would kind of decay off in a field. It would disappear eventually. So this didn't seem to be that kind of situation. So I went down to Washington. I had been working in Washington. I had all the contacts down there. I got the big report that was put out by the government. I read the first summary little document that they had, and it had words like, all the members of the Challenger died, period. They said, after the explosion, period. But they didn't say they all died at the time of the explosion. Now, if you work in government well enough, you know that that's kind of a strange way. That's the way you cover. You say two true statements, but most people will read it a different way. So that puts suspicion. So I went to my friends at the Atomic Energy Commission. I knew some of the chairman up there. I knew the chairman too, but the one I talked to, she said, well, you should go see Senator Pell. And so I went, and Scott Jones was there. And they were saying off the record, well, we're all kind of suspicious about what happened. Then we looked at this question of, was there something on the ship that wasn't supposed to be on the ship? Well, one way it wasn't, and one way it was. The SDI. And we got support from Argentina. A psychic in Argentina sends the question, and it comes back to us and says, did you know about this? Did you have similar things? And about this time, we began to say, I think we should really look at this. This may be real. Let's go, and we brought it to the board. And the board approved a project, and then we got a series of scientists to come and question the challenges as they spoke to the two channelers. We first had only one. I forgot which way. Jeanne was, I guess, first, right? I don't remember which way we did it. But eventually we had the two of them together, which was good because we had the channelers bringing in one astronaut and the other one bringing in another astronaut, and we had the two astronauts talking. But the people who were there were Marshall Pease, who's a mathematician, Bob Shacklet, who's a physicist, Chemo, John Kimo, who just finished a book on channeling, the first one that was out. We had a chemist. I don't remember who else. But anyway, we had a good group of scientists that covered a wide range. Those scientists were asking questions, and I would fill in whenever there was a gap and we needed some more questions, because I would write up a bunch too. So that was the way we approached this whole project. And then Jeanne began to send us the full transcripts. And they began to be transcribed, some here, some out there. So we got a lot of material. That's on the web now. So the thing that changed me and my belief system was we were interacting with an entity, with an intelligence that was changing, that was evolving, that was arguing. It was just like two people. I mean, and you were. So my belief system got blown, and I changed and said, this is real. We have life beyond this life. And that was what the Challenger crew wanted us to relay. And that was the message we would get out. Now, we had a series of strange things happen that stopped us, that delayed us, because it didn't seem like the right time. Something was going wrong. We had a writer, good writer. I went to visit him in Connecticut. Brought my mother, because my father had recently died, or just died. And he was writing books on all of these areas, doing detailed research. What was that? Yeah, Mr. Fuller, John Fuller. The Ghost of 431, he wrote. And they checked that out, and eventually he married the stewardess also, who was on that plan. And she, for instance, could remote write. I mean, she could channel and get information. So I didn't give John Fuller anything. He wanted to check himself. He checked, and then we compared notes, and then they had the same story in it. They didn't die immediately, and so on. All of these stories were true. So at that point, we started the project, and that was how it got going.
Did something happen to John Fuller?
He died.
John Fuller said he would do the book. He couldn't. He couldn't get a funding. His publisher, and he'd published many books, and they were good. I mean, they sold a lot, but he couldn't get that one. It was too political, was the reply. So he said he would run it himself, and that's where. Then he died suddenly. We also had a film man come out from Florida, from Florida. And he said he wanted to make a film. And I wondered why he hadn't called back, because he was ready to do it. And he died.
That's what I'm talking about.
So, I mean, he had a heart attack or something. I don't remember why, because I didn't.
There were a lot of people that didn't exist after they had, and even people who were non-psychics, who were just educators, or they were not educators so much, but scientists, were blackballed people. It was terrible. I thank you for that. You know, you said things I wasn't even aware of.
Pardon me?
You shared a few things that I wasn't even aware of, so thank you, because you were on the research end of it. I was just on the...
You did too.
So,
some things I
well, I think we're going to... Here's Bob Chocolate and Edie, and this is the lead into a song that I wrote the day after the Challenger exploded. And I think it kind of says it all about how she felt about things. I sleep the sleep
Thank you very much.